In this lesson, we're going to continue working on our motion design. Here's where we got up to. I've just replaced the icons and changed some of the timing here. What I want to talk about for a minute is just the motion blur inside the main comp here. So currently, this has motion blur, but that's in the other comp. So this actually has no motion blur based on the camera at the moment. So what we're going to do is turn on motion blur here. And the shutter angle that we want is actually a bit higher than 180. We want to go 270, and that's just because of the shutter speed that I used to film the camera. If you look online, there's actually a conversion from shutter speed to shutter angle that you can use. And also, the problem with this is that if we zoom in here and we compare between motion blur turned on and motion blur turned off, is that there's a bit of a jump in the position. We can see there's a very slight jump, but that's actually making our match move inaccurate. So the correct settings would be to have the shutter phase set to -half of your shutter angle, so -135. And now if we compare the motion blur to no motion blur, we can see that the user interface itself hasn't been shifted towards the left. It is actually in the center of the frame, and the motion blur is being added from there. So this way we actually get our match move looking accurate. And that's a very important thing to remember, because you can actually sort of ruin your match move by having the incorrect shutter phase. So remember, that's -half of what your shutter speed is, or shutter angle I should say. So once we've done that, let's come in and maybe add in the status of the drives, so how full they are. So in the project here, I have, where are they? In the comps section, we have all the icons. I've just labeled these A icons, and the icons for the second console will be called the B icons. But we'll come into, I think it's F and G, that are the drives, the disk drives. So let's come into F, and let's create a shape layer. So we can do that just by clicking on the ellipse tool and not having a layer selected, and we can draw out a shape. Now we need to move this into sort of the center, actually make this a bit bigger. And we want this to be, well, to line it up correctly, it's just easier if you make it quite large, and then you can sort of line it up with the other circles. And what we want to do is then turn on the title action safe and bring the anchor point to the very center. So now we can scale this fairly accurately, and we don't want any fill. So if you click on fill, set that to nothing, and then the stroke, we might want a value of 30 or something like that. Now scale it down a bit. This needs to be quite thick actually, because we want this to be the status bar. I want to be able to see this clearly. So maybe something like this will work for us. And keeping in time with the other effects, let's just see, zoom out here, just see the timing of the other effects by hitting U. You can see that they finish generally around frame 60. So what we can do with this shape layer here is add, it's off screen, but it's trim paths is what you want. And we can set the end from 100% there. Let's just see when these keyframes start. I'm thinking they start at frame 0. Nope, they start at frame 13. That's just the way the timing is. And let's set this to 0. So we want to use the same in-out expo that the rest of the animation has. So ease and whiz and in-out expo is what we want. So let's have a look at this. Turn on the motion blur. Now that's okay, except it doesn't scale because it's not parented to anything that's scaling. So let's just move these down and see this one here is scaling. So let's parent this to D. Okay, now this status bar goes all the way to 100, so this would actually be the background. So let's set this to maybe 20% opacity. So this is the total size of the disk. And then we have the actual used capacity, and we'll set this to 100%, and I want to make this disk 66% full, and there we have it. So there we have our disk percentage. Now we can copy these into the other layers, so I'll just duplicate these two here take away the parent, copy them, actually cut them, and go into icon ring G, go to paste them here, and this is the very last frame, so this is where we want to parent them from, and we'll parent it to, let's just see which layers have scale. C. We'll parent them to the disk. Okay, so hit N. And we don't want C drive to be exactly the same capacity as D drive, so let's just make this, or one of these, just hit U, and this disk can be maybe 35% full. Actually, let's go 45. Okay, so now that that's done, let's go into the main comp and see where we are. That looks good. Now what we want to do is come into the user interface, and when the button is pushed, let's just make sure that these are still timed correctly, because I actually offset it because not much was happening at the very start. So yes, indeed, this is the very first frame that C is tapped. So when C gets pressed, we want to have some sort of animation for that. So I think what we'll do is have maybe just like an invert. And a way we can do that is come to the frame where it's tapped, which I believe is frame 64 in my case, create an adjustment layer here, and I'll just call this touch button press, and add in an invert. Blend that with the original 0, maybe come forward 10 frames and set it to 0. And let's just try expo in out. That's probably a little severe considering, actually we just want expo out because the button press ought to happen rather quickly. So if we just have a look at this in the graph view, we can see that's, let's make this bigger, that's the opacity of the invert. So it happens very quickly. It goes from 0 to 100 and then very quickly dies off. In the first frame it dies off half, and that's why it's neutral gray, and then it slowly restores to its original color. Let's just check that in the main comp. What we might want to do is make these guide layers, because we don't want to see those. It actually might be off screen, but it's guide layer there. And let's see how this looks. Okay, that looks pretty good. I wouldn't mind having something else extending past there, so I'm just going to come into UI. Actually, we'll come into the Windows console, and I'll make a new layer. Just make it 50 by 50. So it's a square. Make it a circle. Put it to where C is. Put it in the very middle of C. Oops. And at frame 64, when it's pressed, let's start it here. Place it underneath C. And scale it. So you can start out about this size. Getting a bit pixely, let's just turn on freeze transformations. And let's set a keyframe here. And 10 frames, it can be 1600. And let's set a fast blur. It can, whoops, did not mean to drag that. Let's put the fast blur on this white solid. Start it at value of maybe 20 because the scale is quite high. And then hit U, actually keyframe the blurriness. Then hit U and set it to maybe 500. And let's turn the opacity from 100 to 0. And let's expo in out these. So expo out. So there we have a nice button press. Let's check it in the main comp. Oops, so that was definitely the wrong timing. It ought to happen here. And what we want to do is actually cut it out of here because it's clipping. We want to paste it inside here. Now we just need to reposition it because it's in the wrong spot. Put it underneath the icons and center it, and then maybe just hit S. And let's go from maybe 200% to definitely not 1600 in this comp. Let's go 200 to 800. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that was way too big. Let's go 200 to 400. And the blur 500 to 300. There we go. And let's just hit U and maybe change that from out expo to out quint, because there's just not enough keyframes there for the expo to look appropriate. That looks much nicer. Okay, so that's just subtle because we're going to have our nice ripples later on. So that's just a subtle way that we can add that effect, or add the button pressed inside the motion graphics. And in the next lesson, what we'll do is transition this first console off so that it can disappear in a very interesting way.